1973, Florida resident Jim Spink claimed to have begun habituating a Sasquatch. Take it as you will. Here's part 1 of 4 of his story. Please support this channel by subscribing and leaving comments. Stay well, stay safe.
Spirit House Publications presents Bigfoot Search and Research by author and explorer Jim Spink.
That's it. I quit. This is my 5th trip in 6 years. I've totaled 24 mosquitoes. For what? Every time I try something, Jen figures it out and avoids it, or just takes off for months at a time. It's been 4 months I've sat here. 4 months. Cold, hot, mosquitoes, sweat, and nothing. How was I supposed to know that the very day that I set up 3 of the 5 cameras that I brought with me, the first time having cameras, that I would get a picture? And because the flash was so bright in his face, that he wouldn't come back. 4 months I've sat here and nothing, absolutely nothing, just gone. I just can't wait, and I've had it. I'm just going stark raving mad. I got to get out of here. That's enough. Time to pack up and row back. I'll be so relieved just to get out of here. Seems like nobody's wanted to hear about anything I've done. Nobody wanted to hear. Enough is... So, what am I supposed to do now? I've got all this amazing experience and data saved up. What am I going to do with it? I know somebody's got to want to hear about it. There's got to be somebody that's interested in this. I mean, nobody has gone out time after time for months at a time and lived with Bigfoot. It's just unreal. There's got to be some way. Well, it all seemed to get started by happenstance. It was 1973. I was engaged and she decided not to. I got fired from my job, got fed up with the social pressures of life, sold most of my belongings at the flea market, moved in my little car, and said, "To heck with it, world. I don't have to pay it, I don't have to earn it." I was enrolled in college, had my GI Bill money. Enough is enough. A simple life is for me. For the first time, too, I had time on my hands. I could go to the city council meetings. I could participate, get involved. They were cleaning up the Miami River, so yeah, let's do it. Meetings, hearings, all kinds of things. It was actually fun. One day, having breakfast, nothing special, I bump into a man who's a treasure hunter. Ooh, wow, this sounds really interesting. He wants to find sunken treasure on the Gulf Coast of Florida. Says there's Spanish galleons during a hurricane. Well, that's for me. I've got nothing better to do anyway, so I might as well. He didn't have any money. Well, heck, what did I care? I was all right. So I volunteered. Let's go find some treasure. Maybe we'll all get wealthy. After all, it's the kind of dream every kid has anyway, isn't it? Well, in the course of this, I discovered that he also did a little digging on the side, not just diving. And so one weekend, he took me and his son and another fellow over to this Indian Mound area, this island on the Gulf Coast, a refuse bin they call it, someplace where the Indians dumped their trash for thousands of years. Mostly shells, conch, clam, oyster, whatever. So, why not? We rented a boat, had to go down the coast to this island, slugged up through the swamp and up the hill of these mounds to the high spot, pitched a couple of tents, spent the night. Put a lantern in a tree just in case, because he thought over the years he'd been digging that some big hairy thing might actually live there. Well, that was really intriguing, because like so many, I'd heard legends and myths and stories about it. I'd read a few articles of people who had seen them and so forth, this creature called Bigfoot. And it was really fascinating. So he figured if we spent the night on this island, maybe we would see them, or at least get some kind of clue as to whether they actually lived there. So we roamed around during the day. Come dark, we cooked dinner and climbed tents. The mosquitoes, nothing to see because it was pitch black, so it was just as well to be inside. So we snuggled in, and sure enough, about midnight or so, the fellow lying next to me reaches across and grabs my arm with a death grip. "What the hey?" And he rolls over and he whispers in my ear that something had just kicked him in the head. Seems he was lying with his head pushed out into the corner of the tent, right along the trail, and something must have come down that trail and stumbled over his head, and it scared him half to death. So we got up and squatted and looked out through the mosquito netting, but there was no way we were going outside. Well, we couldn't hear anything. Nothing seemed to be moving. And neither one of us were in the category of brave, so we just laid right back down and went to sleep. Kind of said our prayers that everything was going to be okay. Well, morning came, sun shining, birds singing. Got up, had breakfast, went over to the big ficus tree where we put up that lantern during the night, and sure enough, there in the dust, 18-inch footprints, bare footprints, in shell. Something just was not normal here. And I knew right then I wanted to find out what. Most of my life, I've been curious about the nature of man anyway. Things I'd been taught, church saying about thou shalt not kill, then you get your draft card and go do it anyway. And science saying that it's nature's way of man killing man, but doesn't seem like any animal in the world did that, actually, except in dominance battles. They didn't just arbitrarily go out and kill each other. Or a lion would kill a gazelle, but it wouldn't go around killing another lion. So things just didn't seem to add up. And having an insatiable curiosity, I wanted to know, I wanted to understand. So here I was in college anyway. I was taking 4 subjects during the semester and studying 10 on the side, just because of curiosity. No special program, no goal per se, just curious. Well, after this little trip, when I got back to school, I changed all my courses. Started taking anthropology, botany, zoology, comparative anatomy, you name it. And I started reading everything I could find. Any literature, magazine, book, idea, whatever talked about Bigfoot, Sasquatch, the Yeti, anything. I wanted to know about it. So I started writing letters, contacting people. I needed some camping supplies too, because I was going to go back to that island and find out for myself. And it was a private island, so I had to get permission, in which I did. I went to flea markets and garage sales, because that $275 a month just doesn't pay a whole lot for expeditions. So I collected. Found the tents in a trash pile along the highway. Got up some canned goods and things. Some gallon milk jugs of water, because I knew it was all salt in that area and no fresh water, so I'd have to take my own water. Didn't have a boat. That was for somebody that had some money. So it took a year and a half of study. Started in '73 when I met that man, and I studied and I collected and I saved, and finally the day came. I had my letter of permission to be there, had everything packed, and it was time to go. So I packed up my little car, even piled it on top, and headed for the Gulf Coast of Florida. Miami had been my home since I was a baby. But you got to go where they're at if you're going to find out anything you need to learn. And I'd read the books and I'd read the articles, and that was as far as I could go. There were several trends that showed up, though, in these stories that I'd been reading. One was that almost every encounter was by accident. Just somebody strolling through the forest or the woods or living out in the boonies, and something would show up or cross their path. Expeditions usually went for a week or two or maybe a month. So there was never any long-term project. I mean, no intense focus through time. And almost always, if it was some kind of an expedition, it was with a hunter's mentality. I'm going to track it down and or shoot it if I get the chance. Shoot it probably out of fear more than anything else. And the other thing was where to go. Most places, thousands of square miles. Back in the 70s, the Pacific Northwest had a lot of sightings of Bigfoot and Sasquatch and all this stuff, but they had 275,000 square miles. And how do you know where to be when? That's the trick. And nobody knew. So it was just hunt and peck. You had to go hunting and hope, cross your fingers and maybe pray a lot. But here was an island, 30 acres of dry ground surrounded by 1 square mile of mangroves. Now, technically, it's an island. Physically, it's a peninsula. The neck from the mainland is underwater during high tide. That makes it an island. But it's only underwater 3 inches. So it hardly matters. So I had decided this trip, I'm going to stay as long as I can. I didn't know how long that was going to be, but it was going to be as long as I could make it. I'd enrolled through the community college in directed independent study, got 3 teachers to sponsor me, so I still had my GI Bill money coming in, and that would at least keep me in groceries and gasoline. So the 110-mile trip, uneventful. I got to the Gulf Coast, got to the nearest community, which was a fishing village, and that was still 5 miles away from the island. Had no boat anyway, so I hired a fisherman. And he was kind of reluctant. It was kind of a strange request to just take somebody out to this island and drop them off. Well, I guess he had seen stranger before. The commercial fishermen were a rather taciturn lot anyway. Though they're truly beautiful people, if you ever need help, they're the ones you go looking for. And they've probably all seen Bigfoot one time or another in the area. Yet at the same time, they don't trust outsiders. And in a way, that's probably really smart. So I was an odd duck showing up amongst their little bailiwick. At any rate, he told me what the fee was, and we loaded the stuff on the boat, and off we went. Down the flats. Now, this whole coastal area is just grass flats. At high tide, you might have 18 inches of water. Low tide in the winter, when the wind's coming out of the north, you'll have mud flats out for a mile to the intercoastal waterway. So there isn't much water as far as depth. So almost all the boats are flat-bottomed dories with an engine in the middle in a box. That way they can really scoot through shallow water and carry a good load. And it's mostly fish and crabs and shrimp. Not too much crabbing, that's mostly deep sea, but mostly fish and shrimp for these areas. Trawlers, dories. So he ran me down to the island. He knew exactly where it was. He knew the little inlet to get in to the nearest landing spot that was closest to the top of the mound. That's exactly what he did. He nosed into the mangrove mud, stopped, and he handed me my gear, and we just laid it into the mud, and he turned around and waved goodbye, and off he went. Well, here I am, absolutely alone for the very first time in my life. I'm in the middle of nowhere. I don't even really know the area. I don't have a way back. And I've never done this before, so I've got these 15 jugs of water, and there is no water supply. Now, I did ask the fisherman's son to check on me in a week or two, just to be sure that I'm okay. When I stopped and think about it, I must have been kind of crazy to do this anyway. I mean, when you really consider how I went about this, well, that's another story. So I spent the next 6 hours hauling my stuff up to the top of this mound. Now, there's a whole series of mounds in this area. There's like 35 mounds, and they're all different heights and shapes and so forth. And it's all very wild. Jungle, I mean, literally jungle. And it used to be settled once upon a time. There was actually a farm of some kind out here. So there's a wild lime grove. Well, it's wild now, but used to be part of a plantation. And they did come out here and dig for shale at one time for road work to put in the pavement. But at this point, it's been abandoned for a long time, and it's really grown up thick with jungle. Though there is a trail that goes up and up and up and weaves through up to the highest point of land. There's a gigantic ficus aurea, which happens to be an edible fig. And it's a lot like a banyan tree because it puts out these horizontal branches that drop shoots down that form big, thick roots and supports it. And this tree is 35 feet tall, and it's a big tree, so it's been there a while. And if nothing else, because the treasure hunters that have been coming back and forth, as my friend who introduced me to this area told me, digging for treasure, they had built a ladder up one of the main vertical branches of this tree, and at the very top put a little plywood platform, maybe 10 inches by 2.5 feet, so that you actually are so high you can see for miles in any direction from this tree. So that was the best place to be. You've got the highest vantage point for seeing. And even though you're on the ground and you don't see very far, at least you know you can just scurry up that tree, and if there's somebody coming by boat, you can see them coming up the bay. So that's where I set up my camp. Now, there were 2 ficus trees, that real big one, and then closer to where the trail enters was a smaller one. It was only maybe 20 feet tall. And it was the best spot that was flat and open enough to put a tent, so I settled in. And yes, I spent all day just getting the stuff in the tent, setting it up, putting it away, not even sorting it out really, but just, well, what's the hurry? I've got plenty of time. So I did. And got to bed exhausted. Well, the next day it was beautiful, though I do admit having been scared to death all night long. All these noises, fish splashing, I didn't know they were fish, birds squawking, just, it's sensory overload to a city person, which I had been all my life. So I was awake most of the night. But come morning, everything was fine. I was happy. The bees were buzzing, the birds were singing, the sun was shining. It was a cold day in January of '75, but it was beautiful. So it was time to set out to explore the island, get the lay of the land. And my project was to discover what existed there naturally. What were the natural plants? What were the natural animals that should be there? So I had books that listed the various animals for this environment, and the plants, and the edible plants, and it was up to me to catalog them. Because for me, it was a matter of a process of elimination. Discover what is known, what is expected, what is typical in an area, and then if something different happens, it's atypical. It becomes an exception. Then you define the exception. And since I don't have any real training in scientific investigation, I did what I felt I could do. So process of elimination was my method. So I got my stuff finally organized and packed away and went exploring. Found a beehive. There was only one on the island. Found out where all the big trees were, and the small trees, and the cactus, and the Spanish bayonets, and the streams, and the little ponds. the 50 or so holes that the treasure hunters had dug. They sure had been busy. I could see I might be having some visitors the way they'd been at it. At any rate, time went by. Except for the exploring during the day, there wasn't much of anything to do. I had a couple of cases of books, and they were wonderful. And especially if this Bigfoot turns out to not show up, I may need to read every one of them and then some. So I settled in. Well, I settled in for about 2 weeks. All of a sudden I discovered no water. Happened to find a piece of pipe some treasure hunter had left, a piece of old conduit. So I tied it off to a sapling next to a big tree and bent it around the tree. And I found a folding chair, surprisingly enough, that somebody had left there. So I set that up, and I hung this U-shaped pipe now from a branch over my fireplace. And I'd gotten this backpack from a garage sale, and it just happened to have a Cub Scout canteen in it. So I took it down and rinsed it out in the bay, saltwater bay, filled it up and brought it up, and I started a fire and started boiling salt water for steam through this pipe. And this pipe was just jammed with dirt and crud and everything else. And I had a big pile of firewood because I had no idea how much or how long or anything. Well, I found out. 12 hours later, I had 1/2 gallon of water. And that's exactly how much I was drinking each day. And that was winter time. So the next day, I refined my techniques a little better, and it only took me 10 hours. And I could not walk away to take a pee without that fire going out and the boiling stopping and no water. So I had to stay right there with that flame just so high, or it'd boil over, or it'd go out, or whatever. And after 10 hours of that the second day, I knew what the squaw's life was like, and I said, enough is enough. That's it. So the third day, I just got dressed, put on my boots and my hat, walked down to the very southern tip of the island, and walked right out into the middle of the bay until a fisherman came along. And sure enough, a half hour or so later, a boat shows up, runs out his net, and sees me standing out in the middle of the bay, wondering, what the hey is he doing out in the middle of here? Well, sure enough, I walked over to him, wasn't too far, told him my story. He said, well, let me give you a ride back into town. Bless you dearly. So he pulled over to my lagoon so I could get my water jugs, and then off we went to town. I had been rescued. Needless to say, the tyro got caught in his own ignorance. Some experience. Well, in town, I was able to fill up my water jugs, get some groceries, and I met a man, an ornithologist, working in a marine lab. Heard my story, took pity on me, and chose to lend me a rowboat. Well, it's a 5-mile row, but at least I can come and go when I got to. So I packed up my belongings that afternoon, got in that rowboat, and I headed off and back to the island. Well, here I am. Another 2 weeks has gone by and nothing. Here it is a whole month. It's still really chilly. All the ground is dry and brittle. The grasses are dried out because it's winter. It's 1st of February. I decided to go do some more exploring on another side of the island, out into the mangroves, find out where the little ponds are and so forth. Overcast day, so the sun's gone, and I get out into the thick of it. And they're just shorties. They're maybe 7-8 feet tall, but at 8 feet, there's not enough trunk to climb them if you wanted to. And all of a sudden, I discover that I'm lost. And I'm slogging through with these knee-high boots, and they're filled with water and mud, and it's like dragging 2 bags of concrete. Finally, I get into this pond, and I just about sink. It's like quicksand. And I've got to slog my way through it, half swimming, half dragging, to the other side. and back into the mangroves again, thankful at least that I'm on some kind of solid ground, until I finally find 3 trees strong enough that I can squeeze together and climb up. Sure enough, I'm going in the wrong direction. I could have been going up the whole coast for miles the way I was going. So I turned and headed towards the mainland. And 20 minutes or so later, sure enough, where do I come out? In a great big patch of cactus and Spanish bayonets. Won't do my boots much good, but sure beats being out in the middle of that swamp. The mosquitoes and the horseflies do not give you a break. Even in wintertime, there's some. Well, thankful for my blessings. I climb up the mound, down the other side, and up my side to where the camp's at, kick off my boots, crawl into the tent, flop down on my cot, and kiss the world goodbye. I've had a day of it. Never mind a little bit of panic, just the idea of being lost. Dark, sleep. All of a sudden, a scream. I mean, a growl that a half a dozen dogs doing their worst would sound like puppies in comparison to this growl. And it's right next to my tent where the trail comes up and enters into the clearing where I'm at. And I'm about to brown my pants. This is the most ferocious, vicious, wildest sound you have ever heard in your life. And I don't know what to do. I search around very quietly for my knife in case I've got to cut the tent and get out. Look for a flashlight so that I'll know where to go once I get out. Look for my tape recorder, which is not to be found, or anything else. I didn't bring a gun. I don't believe in it. And in my mind, this was the boogeyman. You know, the one when you're a little kid, your parents tell you that if you're bad, that the boogeyman's going to eat you. Well, here I was, and I was meeting the boogeyman in person. Needless to say, out in the middle of nowhere, your mind can play tricks with you. Your imagination really expands. I had already lost 23 pounds just in this 1 month from trauma. So down to 142 pounds, I'm skin and bones anyway. I'm nervous. I'm tired from my day's slog, and here comes this roar in my ear. Well, it passed through the camp over by the big ficus, and it started this high-pitched chattering sound. It's almost like something between a scream and a chatter. I don't know what it is. All I know is when I first heard it, it wasn't along the ground. It was up like at the top of the tent. And it passed right on through to the other side. And then it started making this big circuit through the dry brush around the camp area. Well, by the time it was making its second circuit, and you could hear those steps one by one going through the dry brush and the jungle, I had sworn that if I was alive come morning, I was getting the hell out of there. This is crazy. This is too much. No, there's no way. And then I fell asleep. I mean, you can shake just so long, besides the physical exertion of the day, before you just can't take it anymore. And I just fell asleep. Well, dawn came bright. The tent was still in one piece. The bees had buzzed. The birds had sung. Everything seemed to be right with the world. Well, except for me. So I squatted at the doorway of my tent, and I looked out. I didn't know what to expect. Who's to say that it's going to be out there waiting for you? I finally screwed up my courage enough to unzip the tent and step outside. Well, maybe I should say my bladder screwed up my courage enough. So I got outside to take a leak, and sure enough.
Stay tuned for part 2 of Living with Bigfoot. If you're enjoying all this rare and unique content, please show your support by subscribing and leaving comments. Stay safe, stay well.